So the pre-meeting is important for this Zoom format. We really need to make sure we have the details nailed down before we get into the meeting, because there's certain things where if you don't set it ahead of time with Zoom, you won't be able to change it and set it during the meeting. So just to be aware of some of those things, you know, with slides and other visuals, that's just important for you to discuss with your presenter, which I would say all of you do anyway, but just make sure that you also get a copy of the slides and really think about when they're doing the slides, you know, especially in this format, the more complex the slides are, the more chances there are for failure. So, you know, kind of caution your speakers about that. If they're used to doing it in person, it might not come across as well on Zoom if their slides are too involved. Make sure that, and this is all this pre-meeting stuff, this is all something that I would discuss with you, and that you could either connect me with the presenter, or we could do a joint call, a prep call. So it's not like you have to be getting all these answers and then passing them on to me. I'm happy to be in that process of confirming the details with your speaker, so that there's nothing lost in translation. And an important thing we need to know is, can they allow us to record the meeting? Some don't allow for all, you know, different reasons, copyright, or they just don't feel like they can share this broader than what's on the webinar. So we just need to be aware of that ahead of time, so that we're not, you know, recording something and then there's a, you know, hubbub at the beginning of, wait, we're not allowed to record this. So just make sure we're asking that ahead of time. And same thing with the slides. Some of them are comfortable with sharing their slides after, some are not. Usually if they'd like to share them, I would request them to just send me the slides, and I can turn them into a PDF, and then we share with the attendees. And if they also allow it, we would like to post them on the website along with the recording of the meeting. So when we do have it in the resource center, people who maybe don't want to watch the whole hour-long webinar, they could also just download the slides. But again, only if we have their permission. So these next couple things, the polls and the breakout rooms, you know, that I would also say for those to caution them about just using them for the sake of using them, right? If there's no real purpose behind a poll or a breakout room, it's going to just be unnecessary complexity. But if the polls are used as a good way to break up the presentation, or if they want to gather some kind of data about the people attending the meeting, that's a good use of a poll, but it also kind of does, in a negative way, sometimes break up the meeting. So they just need to be thinking about how to use the polls effectively if they are going to use them. And that's something I definitely need confirmed in advance, because the way that Zoom works, you have to input the polls ahead of the meeting, and then when they're there, you can ask them through the polling feature becomes available, but it's not, the questions are, you can't just type them on the fly. It'll be too messy. So they need to give them to me at least 24 hours in advance. And they can only be multiple choice. They can't be fill in the blank or short answer or anything like that. They have to be multiple choice only. And then with the breakout rooms, those can be set during the meeting. So it's more of a question of, you know, if they are going to use them, why, for what purpose, when in the meeting? Is it going to be in the beginning to do some sort of networking, at the end for some networking? How long do they want the breakout rooms to be? You know, if they're only a couple minutes, that's probably not long enough for anyone to have meaningful conversation in the breakout rooms. But if they're too long, you know, that's going to cut into your meeting time. So just thinking about the timing of that and communicating that to me ahead of time, or to the person who's going to be running the breakout rooms, because we'll get into it, but there's ways to set some settings on those and make them a little bit easier to manage. And then the Q&A, that's just important because you want to confirm with them, do they want to take questions throughout? Do they want to hold them until some specific section breaks? Do they want people to put them into the chat box, or would they rather have one of you moderate the questions and the host reads them out loud from the chat, or they call on people who've raised their hands, etc. So there's a lot of kind of questions that you want to ask around the Q&A and confirm with them how they think it makes sense to do them. Ken?
Yeah, I was just going to also suggest sometimes you could ask, are there any questions, and you get dead silence back. So it's also, I think, good practice to have a few questions ready to go. So if you ask, are there any questions, and there are none there, you can say, oh, here's one, and you have one of your pre-written ones. I find it to be very helpful.
Yeah, and it's also helpful to, at the beginning of the meeting, tell people how the Q&A is going to work, because otherwise they're not sure, they're confused. Another good solution is you just say, we'll stop at brief intervals to ask for questions, but in the meantime, if you're thinking of one and we're not stopped for questions, you can always type it into the chat, and then that way when you do pause, you can say, oh, there's already a question here, and ask the question of your speaker. So that's another helpful thing. And then the meeting details, what I have there is just more for my side of things. You're going to confirm that when you're setting up the meeting with me, you just want to tell me, how long is it going to be? And that's going to be on the calendar, the Beacon calendar anyway, so we'll know that. But, another thing you might want to use is the waiting room. So usually I don't put the waiting room on the meetings. I'll do a password, but not a waiting room. But if for some reason you want it, just make sure you flag that with me. And I already mentioned the polls. If you need polls, you need to tell me that at least 24 hours in advance. And then I put on there a pre-meeting survey. Some people have used them for their meetings to get some information, some background information on the people who registered. We just used it recently for the technology executives group meeting. And, as a brief survey, I would say probably keep it to 5 questions or less. But if you do want to do that, again, just let me know in advance, because I'll create that in SurveyMonkey and we can send it out, a couple days before or up to a week before. You just need to confirm that ahead of time. All right, so this is kind of best practices. It doesn't need to be this many people if it's not that complex of a meeting. But this is kind of what I think makes sense in terms of the roles and responsibilities that the subgroup chairs can play in the meetings. So obviously, I put number 4 as the speaker/presenter because they're there and they have a role and responsibility, obviously, but they ideally shouldn't have anything to do with the managing of the meeting itself. They should be focusing only on their presentation, answering questions, etc. It does make sense, though, for them to control the slides, just because they're going to know their presentation better than you will, and that way they don't have to say, next slide, they can just click through. But I also put in there a note that someone else should have a copy of the slides, because you never know when there's going to be an issue on the presenter's side, either with their computer, something happens with PowerPoint, you just never know. So then the active roles in the managing of the meeting, you can have a host/moderator, and that's more of the welcoming remarks, closing remarks. If they're moderating the chat and the questions, they should know, how to monitor that. And you may even want to say, so-and-so is going to be moderating the questions. Please send your questions to Maria or whoever. If you don't want them to go to everyone, if you want them just to go to the moderator, you can have people send them directly to that moderator. That might be a good person to have the slides as a backup, so that person can have a good idea of what's going on in the presentation, and if something goes wrong with the host slides, they can pull them up. I put myself for external support, and that's a little bit of a change from what we've been doing, and it's really because there's so many of these now, and it does take up a lot of time. So it's going to be starting soon that I don't have time to be on all of these for the whole duration. That being said, I'll still do the pre-meeting prep with everyone and making sure we have all the details and logistics confirmed. And I'll still log on 15 minutes prior to the start of the meeting. So that way the host and whoever's managing Zoom and whoever's the speaker and presenter, they can test out sharing their slides. They can make sure that everyone can log in and get their audio and video working. And then what I'm going to do is assist people externally. So I always put my phone number and email address in the confirmation email. And it has been kind of difficult sometimes where I'm trying to help get the meeting started, but then people are also calling me, they can't get into the meeting. So this is just saying that now I'll still help people get into the meeting, but I won't have an active role in the meeting. That way, if I get a phone call, it's not distracting that I'm trying to focus on 2 or 3 things at once. And there will be someone, so whether it's the host or the Zoom manager, you can let me know which you prefer. Sometimes it could be the same person. I'll designate them as the meeting host before leaving the meeting so that you'll have all access to all the host features and capabilities and you won't need me there at all to do anything in the meeting. Again, if there's something that's really complex going on and if we have 80 attendees on a Zoom and it's a really complex meeting, that might be one where I'll stay on for the whole time. But something where it's small and less complex, it would be more that I would turn that over to someone else. And you saw also an email from Lynn Hoban about the ads. We're going to be selling commercials at the beginning of the webinars. If there is one of those, I will definitely stay on for that and just make sure that that gets played or executed properly, because that's something we want to go well and we don't want that to be a technical hiccup. So the Zoom manager is kind of the new thing that we haven't really had someone do aside from me on most of these meetings. So it's going to have to be someone who's very comfortable with managing the participants in Zoom. And again, we'll go over that in a later part of this PowerPoint. But there's the muting and unmuting of people. When I do this, usually I'm watching the whole time. I'm looking at the participant list, and if I see someone new pop into the meeting and they're not on mute, or if you see someone unmute themselves and then they're rustling around, and you'll notice because they'll light up with the green rectangle around their square. So just not getting overly trigger happy with the mute button, but just realizing that you do have that power to get people to not be disruptive in the meeting. And if we do use a waiting room, you'll be making sure to check for people who are in the waiting room, because sometimes you get people into the meeting and then for some reason they get dropped off, whether their internet connection goes out or it's unstable or something, and you'll notice they come back into the waiting room. You don't want to admit someone who looks suspicious, or if you don't think, if the name looks like something that doesn't, fit with a member or something. And that's, again, only if we use the waiting room, which usually most of our meetings don't. You can also designate the co-hosts. So basically, you'll want to designate your presenter that has slides as the co-host so they can share their screen. But you should retain the host title, because the co-host has most of the capabilities of the host, but not all. And there can only be one host, but there can be as many co-hosts as you want. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that you should retain the host capabilities, because that's going to give you the ability to do things like the polls, the breakout rooms, mute everyone, and all that. Although the co-host will see the waiting room as well. And again, you'll manage the breakout rooms and the polls. So does anyone have any questions about this new role, the Zoom manager, or anything that I've gone over so far? All right. So the meeting introduction, I think most of you have a good script for this so far. You're always good with welcoming the participants and everything, but it just helps to remind participants of the technical details, reminding people to stay on mute if they're not speaking, let them know how you want them to do Q&A. And there also is, when you start recording the meeting, they'll get a pop-up notification to accept that they're being recorded. Usually when we record on the cloud, it only actively records the slides, the active speaker, and the host. So for the most part, the regular participants are not going to be, being recorded the whole time. They're only going to be recorded if they are unmuted asking a question, so if they're the active speaker. but it's still something that we want to get consent for. And that's why there is the pop-up message when you decide to record something, that they have to accept it. If they don't accept it, they have to basically say no, and then the meeting will kick them out. So that is important, that they either choose to be recorded or they'll have to leave the meeting. And again, like I mentioned, the ads that Lynn has worked really hard to create the program on, if there is an ad, I will manage the delivery of that ad. So you don't have to worry about that piece of it. But we will, so if there is an ad in your meeting, we'll make sure to let you know ahead of time and tell you where it's going to work into the meeting, so that you're not just all of a sudden being overtaken by me throwing an ad on the screen. It'll be something that we work out together in the flow of your welcome remarks. And then just reminding, which I think most of you already do, you thank the sponsors, the annual sponsors, announce your upcoming subgroup meetings. If you can, take a look at the Beacon calendar of events and see if there's something coming up that might tie into what your topic is, or something that you think maybe the audience would be interested in that's coming up. And we also have a new thing, which some of you may have been seeing on the Beacon website. When you register for an event, there's a new voluntary contribution, and it's kind of our version of a pay what you wish night at the at the museum or something like that. While we're still wanting to give as much content to our members free of charge as possible, we realize that that's having a kind of an impact on our ability to make money off of our events and to bring in that revenue. So what we said was, we'll add these voluntary contributions, and if people want to give $10, they can give $10. If they want to give $0, they can give $0. If they want to give 30, they can give 30. Just making it a way that people can support us through the events and webinars and virtual meetings that we're doing, but only if they want to. What we're asking going forward is if in your meeting introduction or at the end, you can decide which, if you can put in a little plug for that, just to tell people what the voluntary contributions are, and we'll send you a little script for that. But without being overly salesman-y, it would be nice to just kind of remind people that that's there and that's an option available to them. If you liked it and enjoyed this meeting and you thought the content was useful, consider making a voluntary contribution of X dollars, and here's how you can do it on the Beacon website. So again, not taking up 5 minutes of your time to introduce this concept to people, but just letting them know it's available, because every little bit helps with the bottom line. And then obviously introduce your speaker. Any questions on this part of it so far?
Zoe, I have one. This is Amy.
Sure.
On the voluntary contributions, does it only work if you are registering, or is there a way people can do it after the fact?
They can do it after the fact. So it's essentially a product in the store, and we don't really have like a store page on Beacon's website, but I can send everyone links to how to do it after the fact, and we can include that. Maybe you throw up a slide that has that, so that people can find it afterwards.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Zoe, people can also go to any upcoming meeting that hasn't already passed, as if you were going to register. Actually, I should direct this to Amy and everybody else. So if you go back to the events and you go to the calendar where there are upcoming Beacon events, you can actually go to any event page. And at the bottom of that page, if I'm not mistaken, Zoe, you can see the products, the voluntary contributions.
Yes, they all show up at the bottom as related products. And so we set it up basically that they're on there for every meeting. Even some past ones, you could go and find the products, but I think there are 10, 15, 25, and 50 or something like that. But if someone wanted to give $20, for example, you can pick which quantity of each of those products. So if you wanted to give $20, you could give 2 quantity of the $10 contribution or something like that. That's how it's kind of set up there. Any other questions? Okay, and like I said, we'll give you some talking points for those couple of things. And we'll make sure to confirm with you ahead of time if there's any ads or anything, so you're not, left wondering about that. And then post-meeting follow-up, this is again something you'll want to confirm with me. Do you want to, for example, share a contact list of everyone who attended the meeting with all the meeting attendees? That can be helpful if you want people to be networking with each other or connecting with each other afterwards. If you do want to do that, just, again, let me know in advance so I can get that ready to go out after the meeting. So that's something that you could send out in your post-meeting email. You could send out, the slides from your presentation, a contact sheet, and maybe a post-meeting survey. Are you going to be reminding people about the next meeting? There's a lot of things you can put into that post-meeting email, and just, you have to just let me know ahead of time what you want to put in there so I can get ready to build it. And, I would suggest also it's nice to do a follow-up to non-members. And so I can flag that for you and say, here's the people who attended your meeting. These 5 were not members, so maybe you want to do outreach to them and talk to them about membership. It's optional, but I think that's a really good way to get some new members into the fold. And I think it can come from me, but it also is nice to come from someone that they saw hosting the meeting. It's a nice way to follow up with some people. And then we also had this webinar, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago maybe, which was about confidence and presence and just being overall more comfortable with being on video. So I just linked to it here. So when I send out the slides, you can feel free to watch it later. It is kind of long, it's about 2 hours, but it covers everything from like how to make yourself look better on the camera to how to use some of the cool features that Zoom has. And this is a link that should only be shared with other Beacon members. Our presenter was kind enough to make it available to Beacon members, but she did say she doesn't want it just being shared out everywhere. So,
Hey, Zoe?
yes.
2 things. One, is that Laura's?
Yes.
If you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it. I do a fair amount of Zoom work, and I learned a lot from that, so I would definitely recommend that. The other thing regarding ending the meeting, you might want to put in there just some direction on how to copy the chat if people want to do that. Because there's those 3 buttons, in the drop down, and it says copy chat. Some people might get email addresses or just to see what the conversation was.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you could even say in the beginning of the meeting, especially if you're doing introductions, you can say, you're not really able to network it like you would in person, but if you hear someone introduce themselves and you think, oh, that's an interesting person, I want to follow up with them later, you can private chat them and say, hi, Ken, I'd love to learn more about you. Here's my email address. Can we connect, for 30 minutes this week? And that's a good way to use the chat privately. Again, you probably don't want to do that to everyone, but so you can also kind of instruct people how to do that when you do your intros. If you go to the chat and you find the person you want to talk to in the drop down, and then they can save it at the end so they have that record of the conversation.
And so when you copy the chat, it does not copy the private ones, correct?
It will copy. So if you are the person copying the chat, so if I was chatting with you, Amy, and it was private, but I copied the chat, it would copy the messages between you and I. But if you and Ken are talking privately and I'm the meeting host and I copy the chat, it's not going to show me your and Ken's conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now this is the part that we kind of have gone over before. It's the host controls in the meeting. What I'd like to do is, if anyone feels like they already have a handle on this and they want to drop off, feel free to drop off now. And, again, we'll record this in case there is something you want to refer back to later. But this is kind of the more technical side of things. This is really a time for people to get very comfortable with this. And even if there's people who want to test it out themselves, what I was thinking we can do is take turns making people the full host of the meeting, so you can see the actual things in action. And then, if we have a group of 10 or so people, you have a good way to practice with people on the line, but low stakes. Because it is sometimes difficult, you're looking at these screenshots, you're looking at it, and it's not the same as when you have a bunch of participants in the room. Even when I was making these screenshots, I was just testing it with myself, so it was not the same as being live in a meeting. So again, if you have questions while we're going through this, just stop me. And if you want to practice being the host, can you just send a chat message saying that you do want to practice that in this meeting. So you see, as the host, a little bit different of a navigation bar at the bottom than what the participants or even the co-hosts are seeing. Like I mentioned before, the breakout rooms, the polling, some of it should really be controlled by the host. Everyone will see the chat, everyone will see the participants button, everyone sees the mute and start video and all that, but they won't be able to do certain things like the breakout rooms. Sharing your screen, I think everyone's pretty much got this down by now, but just reminding, sometimes the presenter is not that familiar with Zoom, or maybe they use a different platform like Teams, so Zoom is a little bit different. There's some good ways for them to share just their presentation versus their whole screen. Sometimes you do want to share your whole screen. Maybe you have a PowerPoint presentation and you have another document that you want to share, and you have a tab in your web browser and you want to share all three of those things. It might make sense to share your whole screen, because then you're not having to stop to share, reshare every time you want to switch programs. The downside is people will see everything. So if I were to minimize my PowerPoint and I was sharing my whole screen, you're going to see every icon on my desktop. You're going to see whatever I have open, and maybe that's not what you want. So there's just a caution between that. So if you wanted to just share your PowerPoint or just one program, like you could even open a PDF and just share Adobe. So that's something to just be cognizant of and pick wisely what you want to share. And there is a whiteboard feature too. This would be more if you were doing, I don't know, some sort of interactive discussion and you wanted to, mark up something or something like that. And in the whiteboard, you do get a bunch of, drawing tools and text boxes and things like that.
Zoe, how do you share the whole screen? I know you can pick different things from your screen, but I'm not familiar with sharing. I didn't see it as an option on the controls there.
So it should be there for you when you open up the sharing, and I think what it is I've disabled sharing for non-hosts on this meeting, so that might be why you're not seeing it. But there's basically options at the top, which is either share everything, the screen, or share do a whiteboard. You can even connect an iPhone or an iPad. The bottom row is going to be your programs that you can share. So
Okay.
if you're in that top row and it says screen, that's how you share your whole screen.
Okay, thanks.
And just also to be aware, when you share your screen, all the controls, instead of being at the bottom, they go to the top. And you have to kind of hover over the green bar, and then it drops down the host controls from the top. And some of them get hidden in the more, like the chat, for example, goes to more, breakout rooms go to more, the record controls go to more. So you do have to hover over the three dots to see all that. Any questions about sharing the screens? Okay, so managing the participants, as a participant, you can still open that up and see everyone else who's in the meeting with you, but you won't have the same options as a host would have. You can selectively mute people through this feature. You can mute all of them, unmute everyone. Just a note on muting all, it will mute everyone, even your presenter. So if you're going to do that, you should just do it and then unmute your presenter, or make sure that they're ready to unmute themselves if they're about to get into their presentation. And you can also make people the host or the co-host through this feature. So that's where you want to find your presenter, make them the co-host, make sure that they can share their slides. And again, I wouldn't give away the host capability to anyone else, because you should retain that. And if there's someone who somehow gets into the meeting and shouldn't be there, remove. So that's if we, God forbid, have a Zoom bomber, you want to make sure that you're ready to remove them. And I've set it so that someone who's been removed can't rejoin, because theoretically they'd have the link and they could get right back in, but we've set it so they can't do that. So also make sure you don't accidentally remove someone you don't want removed, because again, they won't be able to get back into the meeting. And this is where you can direct people to raise their hand if that's how you're choosing to do interaction and Q&A. So they'll need to know where to do that. If they open the participant window, they see this, and it looks a little different now because Zoom's updated themselves, but so the raise hand symbol looks a little different than the orange hand that's there, but it's all basically the same. When they raise their hand, by clicking that button, it will remain raised until they lower their hand or until you lower the hand for them. So when they click raise hand, then the button turns into lower hand. So if their question's been answered, they can lower their hand. Or if you've answered their question and you just don't want that little symbol to show up anymore, you can just lower their hand for them after you've answered their question. And what's nice about this is it will pop people to the top. So let's say you have a list of 45 participants and Zoe Toy is raising her hand. Normally I'm all the way at the bottom because it goes by first name, alphabetical order. So, you know, you wouldn't see me, for example, just by looking at the top of the list. But if I raise my hand, Zoom says, okay, let me move that person to the top of the list. And it does, you know, try to keep people in order of which they raise their hand. So if you have 5 people raising their hand, they'll float to the top of your list and they won't be hidden. You don't have to keep scrolling down to find them. Same thing with, it kind of prioritizes people based on, if everyone's muted in the meeting and a couple people are unmuted, it'll prioritize them to the top of the list because it thinks they're about to talk. Whereas if everyone is muted and, you know, just your host and your co-host, the speaker, are unmuted and presenting, they'll be at the top. Almost always the host and the co-host will be up at the top. But it does try to prioritize people who raise their hand and put them up towards the top.
Does everybody see the raised hand, or or does the co-host see the hand?
So can everyone see right now that Maria has her hand raised?
And I do have a question.
Okay.
If I as the host mute everyone, could, you know, Ben unmute himself to ask a question, or do I have to go and unmute him?
He can unmute himself, yes.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So
Normally, if you just click, if you're an attendee and you click to open the participants, you can actually see whose hand is raised. Any participant can.
Oh,
yeah. And what's nice too is so let's say you're not sharing any slides. Like for me, I had to drag my window up a little bit bigger because I was only seeing a few people's thumbnails. You can actually, as a host, see everyone. If their hand's raised, you see a little icon in the left-hand corner of their picture. And so right now I can see Maria has her hand raised. And actually, if I hover over Maria's image, I can click to lower her hand right there. There's a button that appears. All right. So, and it does, even when I have only a few people showing, it did put Maria up to the top. So I saw her with a hand raised, even though I only see 4 people right now. And then the chat feature, I think we all pretty much know how to use this, but sometimes you'll have to tell participants how to get to it. And you might have to remind people about, again, that private chat ability so that they're not sending, you know, private requests to connect with each other to everyone. It's not the end of the world, but it's going to kind of pop up into everyone's view. So that you might not want everyone typing to everyone, or that might be exactly what you want. Maybe you say, maybe part of your presentation is, hey, everyone type into the chat an experience you've had with XYZ, and they can type into the chat. And maybe you want to see everyone's answers and you want everyone to see each other's answers. It's up to you, but you should just set that expectation ahead of time. And you can also, this is something that maybe you're not familiar with, you can do a couple different things with the chat window and with the participant window. If you like it better where it's kind of its own window and it's floating, you can do that. Or you can pin it to the side. So if you're in the chat, and it's going to be different, actually. It's different because I'm presenting my screen. But there is, when you open the chat, there's an option, I think it's at the top left corner, where you can either close or pin it to the side or pop it out. Pop out means it becomes its own window. The side means it kind of clicks into the side. And there's a couple views that you can have as a participant when you have someone sharing their slides. So you can have it so that it's the slides on the left and then a little skinny window with people's, with the participants' thumbnails. And then on the right of that, you can have the chat pinned and the participant window pinned there. And you kind of get this triple pane view. And you can actually drag between the different panes to make certain things bigger and smaller. So if you don't really care about the slides, you want them to be smaller, you can drag them smaller by just dragging that the bar in the middle smaller. And same thing with the chat, you can drag that to be a little smaller if you want people's pictures to be a little bit bigger. So you can play around with that as a participant. It does get a little bit tricky when you are presenting your screen. It just makes all of the different options different. And it's hard because I can't even show you what I'm seeing right now, but that's why we'll do some practice where people can become the host.
Some of the features when you're attending, Zoe, if you're not hosting, are under the view options. So for me on a laptop at the top, if I don't know if everybody can see, I've got a green box that says you're viewing Zoe's screen, and then right next to it there's view options with a little click down, and that allows you to hide video, side-by-side mode, different options there too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then Zoom remembers that, so if you set it for side-by-side view, that's your preferred view, next time you sign into Zoom and there's a screen share, you'll be automatically in that view, but you can always change it later. Even when you are presenting your screen, there's different options too for how many videos you want to see. So right now I have it set that I want to see as many people's images as possible, but that obviously covers more of my screen, more of my slides are covered now by people's images. So you can actually even choose just to see the active speaker view, and it'll be mostly your slides, and it'll be one person, you probably, if you're the one presenting, that'll be showing in your screen. The downside to that is you're then not seeing people, so you don't see if people are raising their hand or something like that.
Yeah, sometimes too, I think people find it distracting to see themselves. And if within your box, there are those three dots next to the mute and unmute button, you could actually hide your own view. But typically, I think speakers might do that more often just because it's distracting to see yourself. Personally, I hate seeing myself. I don't know when this all happened to me, but I never knew I had it until I started watching myself on videos.
Yeah, so that's a good point. The three dots at the corner of your own image, if you click on that, the bottom option there is hide self view. So you can actually completely hide yourself. Everyone else will still see you, but you don't have to see yourself. The other options in there, actually, which I'll point out, are you can pin video. So let's say I only want to see Ken talking for some reason. I don't know why I'd want that, Ken. But if you want that, you can hover over any person's image in there and choose to pin that person's video. And that's only for you. So you'll see just that person. And, you know, again, I don't know necessarily why you'd want to do that, but if it's distracting for you, let's say you're watching a presentation and you get distracted by seeing too many people presenting, you might want to choose that option and just pin the presenter so you're not having to worry about seeing anyone else. And everyone can pin a different person if they want. You know, Frank can choose to pin Wendy and Wendy can pin Charlie. It doesn't really matter. Zoom just lets you choose that for yourself. A different option that the host will have that the participants do not have is to spotlight someone's video. So I'll just do that now and you'll see what it does. So have you now all seen that it's just me? Yeah. So Spotlight basically tricks your Zoom into an active speaker view instead of gallery view. And the only thing to be mindful of is now when I unspotlight or cancel the spotlight of my video, most people, their Zoom stays with them being still highlighted. And so that person, if they want to go back to seeing everyone, they have to go back and choose gallery view again. So you can do that. If you go back to choose gallery view, you can make it so you're not just seeing me. You can go back to seeing everyone. Any questions about that so far? Oh, I can't hear you, Wendy.
Oh, sorry. Did you say that only the host can do that, or can the co-host do the spotlighting as well?
Actually, I've not tested that before, so we can test that maybe after this, after we get through this, we can test that when we're testing other things. I know that the pin video is for everyone. I think that Spotlight might just be the active host, but we can test that out.
Okay.
And how do you undo, like if we had identified one person or something like that, how do you undo that? Do you just go back up to speaker view or gallery view and undo it that way?
Yes, so when someone is spotlighted, they get, Zoom kind of prioritizes their video for everyone, but people can still go in and choose gallery view again. It just kind of defaults them to active speaker view. And sometimes you can use that actually to your advantage. So let's say you're doing a panel discussion and you want the person speaking to be highlighted. Instead of having to keep spotlighting a person's video every time they're about to speak, which it's just, there's no way you could do that. There's too much going on. You could first spotlight the person who's doing the welcome remarks and then cancel their spotlight. And that will kind of trick everyone's computer into being in active speaker mode. And then you'll see only the person who's actively speaking as the big image, and then the little images will be at the top. They can still choose to go back to gallery view if they want, but it's kind of a way to pop them into a different view. Does that kind of make sense? It's a little bit hard to explain, but it's a way to kind of force other people's Zooms to look in a certain way. And again, it's similar to the muting and unmuting. You can mute everyone, but they can still unmute themselves. You can put everyone into active speaker view, but they can still go back to gallery view. But a lot of people won't do that because it does make sense in certain scenarios to be in active speaker view. Maria, did you have a question?
Yeah. I'm a little lost in the spotlight view. So let's say I have I'm the host and then I have a speaker and I want to spotlight that speaker. What do I do to spotlight that speaker again?
So it's going to be in the three dots. And again, it's just for the host. But when you click on that, one of the options is to spotlight video.
Okay.
So let me try to take a...
That's okay. I just forgot where it was.
Okay, yeah. And if you want to test it out after this, I can make you the host and then you can test it and see where it is. But it's a little hard to share because Zoom doesn't share its own windows. So when you have Zoom open and you're like, oh, let me show you how to do this, Zoom says, you don't want to see Zoom. I'll just show you only the screen. I won't show you the Zoom windows.
Okay, now as long as I know where it is, now I got it. Thank you.
Zoe, I have another question.
Sure.
Does Zoom allow you to spotlight two people at the same time?
No, it can only spotlight one person.
Okay.
All right. And if you was a presenter who had slides and you wanted to spotlight that person, it's going to still show the slides. So if someone's in that side-by-side view, it'll be the slides and then one person's video, the host or the spotlight video at the right side there. So you don't have to worry about if you spotlight someone, is it going to take over the slides? The slides will still be there, but the person will be the only person that people see.
But for example, if you had a panel of 2 speakers, there's no way to spotlight them both at the same time.
No.
Okay, thank you.
So then this other piece was the polling. So if you have your questions pre-built, when you click on the poll button in your meeting, a window will pop up on your screen only. It won't pop up on the participant screens yet. And if you had more than one poll, you could actually open up whichever poll you want. So, and another thing to keep in mind too is if you want the questions to show up together or separately. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have 4 poll questions you want to ask throughout the duration of your meeting, but you want 2 to come up at the beginning, and you want the last 2 to come up at the end. You have to set that up as 2 separate polls, which I'll set up for you, but you have to let me know that they're 2 separate polls. Or if you had 4 questions and you want them to all show at the same time, you would set that up as 1 poll with 4 questions versus 2 polls with 2 questions each. And they can only be multiple choice, or they can be multi-select. So I just set up a fake one in here. What's your favorite season? And this is a single select, so they can only pick spring, summer, fall, or winter. But if they, let's say it was a question of, you know, which of these are you familiar with? And they can choose up to 5 answers. That's also possible. But you have to let me know ahead of time what you want the options to be, if you want them to be multi-select or single select, and how you want the polls distributed throughout the meeting. And then, so I would create the polls for you, but then you also want to make sure that whoever is managing the Zoom, they're aware of when the polls should be. So sometimes it's helpful for the presenter to have a slide that maybe has the question on it, so that the person who's managing the polls can say, oh, that's my cue, let me launch the poll. Or they can verbally cue it and just make sure that the person's paying attention. So they'll say, oh, we're going to go to a poll now. So-and-so, can you help me pull that poll up? Another thing to keep in mind is the, go to the next slide. So when the poll is in progress, the attendees are not seeing the results as they're coming in, but the host and the co-hosts, any of the co-hosts are seeing the results coming in live. You'll want to be clear on who is managing the poll, because yes, just because someone's the one to launch it doesn't mean that they're the only one seeing it. So if you had a host and 3 co-hosts, all 4 of you are going to be seeing the polls in progress. If one of you clicks end polling, it ends it for everyone. If one of you clicks relaunch polling, it relaunches polling for everyone. So you'll want to just be clear at the beginning to say, you know, Charlie is in charge of the polls, only Charlie's going to touch the poll buttons. And just because the co-hosts are seeing the buttons doesn't mean that they should be meddling with it, because it does get to be, you know, if someone accidentally relaunches the polls, it's going to wipe all your data from the poll that you just collected. So be really clear on who's going to be doing it, and just remind people, you know, remind them before the meeting starts, hey, you know, Charlie's in charge of the polls. Even though you'll see the poll window pop up, don't do anything with it, because you don't want to have multiple people clicking on different things. So when you end the polls, you can choose to share the results with everyone, or you don't have to. If you do share the results with everyone, it'll pop open a window on everyone's computer that shows them the results. And that window will not go away until you click stop sharing results. So just keep that in mind as well, because it's going to be in people's way of seeing the rest of the meeting if you forget to turn off the sharing, because just you closing the poll doesn't stop it from sharing. Anyone have questions about polls? All right. So the other features that I think a lot of you have either experienced or maybe even managed before are the breakout rooms. They can be a really good tool for smaller group networking, just because when a meeting has 40 or so participants, you're just not going to be able to have that crosstalk that you normally would at an in-person meeting. And this is a good way to kind of fake that a little bit. It's going to tell you how many participants you have, and in this scenario, it only counts the participants and the co-hosts. So if you have 40 people in the room, but 39 are your co-hosts, and participants, it'll say 39 participants. It won't count you as the host in the count of people to assign to the rooms. And you can choose how many rooms you want to set up. You can, I think, do up to like 100 rooms. You know, again, you probably wouldn't have the need for that, but you can set up 5 rooms, and it'll tell you at the bottom here where it says 0 participants per room, it'll tell you, you know, if you had 40 people and assigned them to 4 rooms, it'll say 10 participants per room. So it's just a way to, you know, if you're looking for a certain number of people per room, you can just keep playing with the number of rooms. This whole part in the beginning, you can play around with this as much as you want before people are actually into the rooms. And you can choose to do automatic or manual. Automatic just means that Zoom says, I'll just arrange people for you. It'll be random. It's good because then you don't have to worry about clicking through each person and assigning them to the rooms. But if you, let's say you had, you know, 10 people and you wanted to make sure that these 5 people got into one room and these 5 people got into the other, you could choose to manually assign them. And you'll see what that looks like in a second. So next to assign, so this is when you get to the next screen. So when you've done the create rooms, you'll see assign, and you can, when you click on that, you'll see a list of everyone who's not been assigned to a room. And when you go to their name, you can click assign to room 1, room 2, room 3, however many rooms you have. Or let's say you have 2 rooms set up and you just realize that you don't want 2 of the people in room 1 to be in the same room as each other. Even though Zoom has already automatically created and randomized the rooms for you, you still have the option to move people around, as long as you do that before you open the rooms. So let's say Zoom automatically put Jory and Lynn in the same room together, but you don't want them to be in the same room. You want Jory to be in one room, you want Lynn to be in the other. You can move Lynn to room 2 and move someone else from room 2 to room 1 to still even out the rooms. You can move people around as much as you want within the rooms. Then at the bottom left, there'll be options for certain things you can set ahead of time. So a couple things to be aware of when you, this one here, breakout rooms close automatically after X number of minutes. You can set that to whatever you want. So if you want the meeting to be 15 minutes, you can set it to be 15 minutes. And that's good because it'll give people a countdown clock at the top right of their screen. If you choose this next one here where it says countdown after closing breakout room, you can set that to 15 seconds, 10 seconds. I think there's set options for that. I forget what they are, but let's say you set it for 60 seconds. That's going to be 60 seconds on top of whatever time you set it for here. So if you want people to have 30 minutes total, you would put 29 in this box and you'd put 60 seconds here. Or if you wanted 30 minutes, but you don't want to give a whole minute of countdown, you could put 30 minutes here and just make this countdown 10 seconds instead. Or you could choose to have no countdown. The problem with that is it's just going to dump people, you know, if people aren't looking at the clock, all of a sudden they're just going to be dumped back into the main room. So it's usually good to give them at least a 10 to 15 second warning that they're going to be brought into the main session. Because once they get that notification, I'm trying to see if I have that. I don't think I have a slide on that, but once they get that notification, there is a pop-up window that shows up in their screen that says your breakout room is closing in 60 seconds, and it counts down 59, 58, 57, all the way down to 0. But there is a button right there that they can press to get them back into the main session right away. So some people do accidentally click that, and then all of a sudden they're back in the main session when they still had a minute left in their breakout rooms. So just, you know, be aware of that. And it doesn't, the box doesn't really go away. So sometimes people just, without thinking, click the button. And the host, the main host of the meeting, not the co-host, the main host of the meeting will remain in the main session. So once everyone joins that, sorry, that's my doorbell. Once everyone joins that session, the host is kind of just by themselves in the main room. So it can be kind of, you know, it's kind of funny, all of a sudden you see people's images disappearing one by one, and then all of a sudden you're just left by yourself. But you can join any of the rooms that you want. So if you, let's say you want to pop into each of the rooms to check out how they're doing, you can open this window up and join each room. So let's say you want to join room number 1 first, you would click to join. Once you're in that room, you can click to leave that room. You go back to the main session, and you can choose to go into room 2, room 3, as many rooms as you have. And you can click when you're done with all the, let's say you didn't put a timer on there and you just were letting it go for however long you wanted it to go for, you can close the rooms at any time.
Can we talk around the side?
So you can also broadcast a message to everyone, and that's useful, like if they're, sorry about all the distractions on my side. So there's also an option to broadcast a message to all. So let's say you're doing a breakout session and you wanted to remind people, this is the question you should be discussing. You can actually pop that window open and broadcast a message that has the question that you're asking. Or you can pop that open and remind people, in case they're not watching the countdown timer, you can say 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left, give them warnings through that. And it just basically sends a pop-up message to all the rooms that are going on, and everyone sees it. And then within the room, if people are having issues, or they, maybe they're supposed to be discussing something and they've completely forgotten what they were supposed to be discussing, they have a little button at the bottom that says ask for help. And if they ask for help, the host will get a notification that someone is asking for help in room whatever. And you can click to go into that room then, and it'll pop you into that room. And then just something to be aware of when you're the host and you are ending the meeting, a participant will see leave meeting, and they can leave anytime they want, nothing happens. If the host leaves the meeting ends. So if you're the host and you, like, this just happened to me the other day, where 2 people said, oh, I want to stay on after this and have a chat with so-and-so. And I said, okay, I'll leave the meeting, but I'll let you guys chat. And I forgot to make one of them the host. So then when I left, they were both kicked out of the room. And so just be mindful of that if people are trying to have a conversation afterwards, or if you're, saying, oh, we'll just leave it open for the next 15 minutes for any kind of networking, even though the meeting's over, feel free to stick around. Well, you actually have to stick around for that, or assign someone as the host before you leave, because it really will end it for everyone. I see a couple people with their hands raised. Jory, did you have a question?
Yeah, back to the breakout rooms, and this is maybe, I don't even know if this is a feature or if this is more advanced than we want to go here, but when we attended that centricity event the other day, I think there was some feature he was using to put people into breakout rooms after, we had 3 or 4 different breakout rooms, but to never repeat the same people within the breakout rooms. Do you know if there's a feature that can randomly assign people yet doesn't duplicate them with the same people they've already been in a room with?
No, I think that was just luck of the draw, because I got into the same room as Taylor Fernley 3 times. So it was just, so it's just luck of the draw, unfortunately. There have been some cases where I've manually done it. So when we did our new member orientation, for example, I wanted to make sure that new members, there was 3 different people that they got to talk to each time. But I had to do that manually. So I had to take a note of who was already paired with who, and then make sure that I switched it up. So unfortunately, there's really not a way to do that. There is a way to set the breakout rooms ahead of time. The issue with that is that it has to be with a registered Zoom account. And it also has to be, you don't know, for example, let's say you assign 3 breakout rooms, and for whatever reason, the people that don't attend are all in breakout room 3, and now breakout room 3 only has 3 people in it, and the other rooms have 6 people each. You're still gonna have to move people around anyway. And mostly for our purposes, we don't usually have breakout rooms where we say, oh, these people have to be put together, or these people can't be put together. So usually for our purposes, manual works fine. Or automatic assignment works fine. But you can always let the person who's going to be managing the rooms know ahead of time. So something you might want, for example, is let's say you have 5 breakout rooms, and you have 5 people who are going to be the moderators for those rooms. Just let the person managing the rooms ahead of time know that ahead of time, so they can say, okay, I have to make sure that Maria gets into one room, Jory's in another room, Wendy's in another room, and Charlie's in another room. And then that's the only then everyone else can be randomized, but then that person's just making sure to make one of those people assigned to each of the rooms.
Thank you.
Do we have another question? No? Okay. So I think that was the end of, I think that was the end of my slides. Yeah. So I was just reminding to end, if you're going to end the meeting for everyone, just assign a host if possible. All right. Okay, so now we can, if anyone needs to drop off, feel free to drop off. But if people want to practice being the host, we can do that now. And I will just assign each person to be the host one by one. And then you'll see the things, and we can even test doing breakout rooms. We can test whatever you want. So if you want to test that out, I see a question here from Charlie about how to copy the chat. So if you open the chat window right now and you go to the bottom, you'll see that there's a couple options where you have type the message. You can choose who to send the chat to, or you can, at the right side, choose the 3 dots with more, and then at the very top, it should say save chat. So that's how you do it there.
Thank you.
Let's see if I have any other questions. Oh, and then Jory just mentioned in the chat also, the raise hand is only for the participants. So you won't be able to, as the host, you won't be able to raise your hand. And that's because theoretically people are raising their hand to talk to you, not the other way around. So,
Or even co-host, because I've been on meetings where I've been a co-host and I can't raise my hand, just so everyone knows.